chess games have been played with much vigour and enthusiasm among lesser mortals than the men slugging it out inside. In the gentle surroundings of Green Park in central London, amateurs from all over the country, and indeed from all over the world, have been pitting their wits against each other in all weathers. Curious, by the way, that it needed a decision of the Cabinet itself to allow games to be played in Green Park at all. For those who fancy their chances, they can have a go at one of the Grandmasters or Masters on hand to play simultaneous games. By the way, Paul Morphy, the American, once played a simultaneous against 10 amateurs, and to give them a chance, he played blindfolded, and he still beat most of them. And perhaps nothing illustrates so dramatically the gulf between the casual chess buff and the real expert than the sight of the master playing 12 challengers all at the same time and leaving them, for the most part, not knowing quite what's hit them. But inside the Park Lane Hotel, the chess is on a completely different level. And no game has been finer in this match than Game 7. Last week, Jan Timman showed how Karpov thought he might have missed a win. But even if he did, it was a marvellous game. And here it is from the start with Bill Hartston.
This is a real heavyweight tussle, this game. So many of the World Championship games are really just very high-level technique by both players, which everyone can understand. But this game was just full of moves that left even the grandmasters in the audience absolutely baffled and astounded. The opening was just a quiet Queen's Gambit, exchange variation, Karpov, as often before, exchanging the pawns. The first surprise came actually quite early in the opening. It's all very normal up to here. White's queen has just developed to try to stop black from bringing his bishop out to its most active square. Kasparov's reply, still theory, the pawn supporting the advance of the bishop to that same square. So now the bishop comes out attacking White's queen. Now the normal move would certainly be for White to move his bishop in between the black bishop and the white queen. Instead, Karpov played a move that really breaks the opening principles. First of all, we're told not to move the queen in the opening anyway. Karpov moved his queen twice. Now, what he's gained by that is that black has been encouraged to make this pawn move, which weakens the black squares on the black king's side.
But why move the queen to that clumsy, undeveloping kind of place? Look, it has no moves to make after it goes there. It should have gone, in the traditional course of events, up to b3 algebraically, or in that nice pulsating square, attacking the black pawn way down the line and doing wonderful things.
On Queen's Knight 7.
But that's, actually it's only good to bring the queen out to that square if black hasn't already moved his pawn out. That's what theory says, because black can bring his queen out in reply to b6, challenge queens, and black has no problem. Karpov has a much deeper idea with his queen move. His queen doesn't seem to be doing anything yet, but it's part of his strategy. His strategy in this game is to use his majority of pawns in the center. That exchange of pawns right in the opening gave him this majority of pawns in the center. This is normally played by White much, much later in the game. It's a late middle game strategy in this opening to try to bring the pawns to these two squares in the center. After you've brought out all the pieces, you use these pawns to advance. But now Karpov's queen looks much more sensible. His queen and bishop are on the same diagonal. And after his next move, we see the whole point of White's play. His queen and bishop stopping the black knight from coming out. Now in the rest of this game, black has enormous difficulties developing this knight. It just has nowhere to go. White's queen, which looked so clumsy a few moves ago, is already active.
Now this last move by black looks pure coffee. It's the kind of move you've made many times, Bill, I think.
High-class positional play, you mean? It's, yes, it's the right move.
The right move. It weakens the king's side. It doesn't really accomplish anything. It gains a little space.
In a way, it shows the problems of black's position, because he's trying to bring his knight out. His knight's only good developing square is this one on the edge of the board. Now, he still can't move it there. It'll still need another defender, but black must fight for space on the king's side. White has conquered so much territory in the centre. So I see that pawn move as essential for black. Now white's playing a pawn move on the other wing, just in case black ever gets ideas of bringing his knight in to attack the white queen. That makes sure it'll never happen. So white concentrating on the pawn moves to gain space, stop black moving forward. And now extraordinary maneuver by Kasparov. A check with the bishop, pawn comes in the way, and then he retreated the bishop to the same square it had come from. So Kasparov's given up two moves there in a position where he's behind in development anyway.
It's not just that he's behind in development, Bill. All his four minor pieces have no future. One knight can't move at all. The other can only bury itself back behind the queen and near the rook there, yeah. The bishops have no future at all. The bishop on the light-colored squares has absolutely nowhere to go and nothing to do. It's no better than a pawn.
Now Karpov playing another move that really surprised the audience. Before his completed development, he moved his king. And everyone assumed the intention of that move was to bring his rook quickly onto the square the king has just vacated. Especially after black's reply. Black's trying to get rid of this bishop, which is a bit of an embarrassment to him. Now, people expected white to exchange bishops and to bring his rook to that central square, and then to think about a later push of his pawn to try to crush through on the white squares, a quick attack. Karpov's reply just came as a surprise to everyone.
That's an astonishing move, Nathan. It puts him back with his entire king's side undeveloped. What was the reaction of the grandmasters and the crowd down at the hall?
I have seldom met so many grandmasters and masters saying out loud, "We have no idea what's going on." It really was an interesting thing that all this chess knowledge in the room, it was like an encyclopedia of experience, all hopelessly confused by what was going on the board. They had one thing in common. They felt that white had an excellent position.
It's a nice example in this position of how much freedom one has for personal style in a game. When Karpov moved that bishop back, as I said, other players were thinking of playing it dynamically, exchanging bishops, trying to push through in the center. Instead, Karpov is just saying by that move, this bishop is a very poor piece in black's camp. It's hampered by its own pawns, so I'll leave it on the board. And, well, we see later that he seems to be right. Now, Kasparov also not castling. And what he's trying to do is to bring his king into this square, where a bishop really belongs, just so that finally he'll be able to develop that wretched knight.
It's beginning to look like a game between two beginners.
This looks like a game between two Japanese, because in the Japanese chess, shogi, they play just like this, because they can't castle, and the kings always run off round the corner like that. Or maybe a 15th century game before castling was invented.
Right.
You're going to have to make people rethink some of the first principles about developing knights before bishops and tucking your king away into a corner as fast as possible, because it doesn't do any of those things.
It's curious how both sides seem to have been concentrating on stopping their opponents developing. And both players induced these pawn moves on the king's side, which made it difficult for the pieces to come out. So instead of castling, the kings are just running away into safety, castling by hand. Now some queenside pawn moves. Kasparov trying to get some counterplay on that side, Karpov stopping him. Now,
My goodness.
another extraordinary, another piece moving back to its home square.
I wouldn't have been more surprised if he'd moved it one square back right off the board.
All that move seems to do, well, there are perhaps two ideas. One idea which no one would have thought of at the time, but it seems to be the real idea, is just to vacate the square for the knight. He has a very long-winded knight maneuver coming up. Perhaps also there's a thought of lining up the black queen and bishop so that black will be able to advance this pawn one square. But now Karpov moving his knight out not only stops that pawn advancing, but threatens to occupy the same square with the knight. Now white would have a complete stranglehold on the position, and a very promising attack if the knight got into there. So Kasparov felt obliged to take it off. But now he's given up that bishop. That wasn't a great bishop.
A bad bishop?
Well, there's no such thing.
Oh, Bill's convinced there are bad bishops and good bishops, and I want to know whether Bill thinks that was a bad bishop or not.
That was a bad bishop, yes. But even bad bishops can be good for defensive purposes, and later he really misses it. Now Karpov's king getting out of the firing line. Now the position is at last they're beginning to finish playing the opening. They seem to have played most of the middle game, and now they're bringing their pieces out. Now, this is the knight maneuver that I mentioned earlier. The knight is finally finding a good square. And black is trying to counterattack the white center. Now that knight, at last, plays a move. I think this is move 24 of the game. The knight hasn't moved yet. Now, the plan for white, everyone thought now, is perfectly clear. White has a clear advantage. He has more space given by his central pawns. And the right plan, everyone said, is to advance this pawn, first one square, and then to try to push it right forward and to rip open the defences to black's king. Now, perhaps white would move his rook first, behind the pawn, and then push that. Everyone here thought that Karpov had a huge, maybe winning advantage, and that simple plan would win the game. Instead, he played a move on the other side of the board.
So, Nathan, what did the grandmasters make of that?
Well, it's certainly agreed that the two white bishops in the center, if you could open the position up, their power would become overwhelming. And they all expected it to happen on the king's side, where black was more vulnerable. The fact that he went up on the other side to try and rip the position open was a great surprise to most of the people there. I suppose it was something like opening up a second bank account.
I think there was something else to it, that the clock times were beginning to play a part in this game, because at this moment Kasparov had 15 minutes left for his last 15 moves. They're at move 25. Karpov had half an hour left, and I think he fell into the trap of playing quickly in his opponent's time trouble, of trying to rush his opponent in time trouble. It's just as easy to lose games in your opponent's time trouble as it is in your own. Now Kasparov brought the queen out, attacking that white pawn that's just moved up. Now the next few moves, Karpov thought for a few minutes over this move, but the next few moves were played very quickly. Karpov played the pawn here. Now this is deep, complicated, and Kasparov had seen it all because he replied immediately. The first point is that black's invited to take that pawn with his own pawn, when white's knight would come to this square attacking two black pawns. White would win back his pawn after some more complicated play and have a big advantage. But Kasparov had expected that, he'd seen it, he knew what Karpov was thinking about. He bypassed the pawn. Karpov immediately replied with the knight move. Now, it was clear that Karpov playing quickly here was expecting Kasparov to use up a lot of time to get into time trouble, and he also was expecting to get a good position at the end of it, but Kasparov calculates these things so quickly. Now, black took a pawn. These moves were just rattled off very quickly. The bishop must move with gain of time. Bishop takes the knight with check. Rook recaptures. White has regained his pawn. attacking the queen and the bishop. Queen retreated. And this is the immediate end of the complications that white initiated. White seems to have a very nicely placed knight in the centre, supported by a bishop, and black has this wretched rook doing nothing on the edge of the board.
And the sick pawn in the middle. Isolated, lonesome, lost.
Defended by the knight, but only just. And white still has this plan of pushing his kingside pawn and opening black's position. Now that move also came instantly from Kasparov, and now it was Karpov's turn to stop to think.
It's clear that Kasparov is a wonderful street fighter. In a bad position, short of time, he kept finding dangerous and hard to find moves.
And all of a sudden he's back in the game, because that pawn move has brought his rook back in the game. The rook is now going to be operating on an open file. And it shows the glimmer of the idea that he had when he played the bishop check on that same square so long ago. White's pawn was made to advance here, and that's given black the opportunity to open this line. Now, this is a tricky move by Karpov. It's very neat, really. He's moving his rook off the file, tempting black to exchange, which is perhaps a mistake. It's been criticised, this move. What's happening now is that both players are trying to attack on the same file. This file that the black rook is on, that white's rook just moved off. Both players can get very dangerous attacks on that line. Now, Kasparov thought 4 or 5 minutes over that rook move, and it's an extraordinarily deep idea. Karpov's rook came back.
That's lovely.
Now, everyone here thought Karpov must be winning. He has a threat of mate in 2. His queen is threatening to come in and give a check, and the queen and rook on the same line would just mate in 2 moves. But Kasparov was ready with his defense. Bishop came out immediately, attacking white's queen. Pawn in the way. And now this rook move. He ignores the attack on his bishop and played that rook move. And Karpov was just stunned by that move. And really, he completely went to pieces. This is the position in which he missed the forced win. By now, he'd caught up on time with Kasparov. They both had just a few minutes. Karpov had 9 minutes left. Kasparov had 5 minutes left, but over this move, Karpov actually overtook Kasparov. He thought 6 minutes, missed the win. Now, we'll show you the finish of the game. Pawn took the bishop. And then, this is black's point. The rook is giving itself up for knight and bishop, so white has now won a rook for knight. White's in check, but white has these wretched pawns all the way along that line that the black queen is on.
I guess we could say they have Legionnaire's disease.
They're dropping like flies. Every move black takes a pawn from now on. And it's white who's actually in danger of losing this game. Queen and knight can be a very potent attacking force together, and white must create counter chances. Now, as queen and rook at last have created a threat down the f-file. Kasparov took the pawn. And this was the last move actually played in the game. The game was adjourned here. Kasparov sealed his next move. Most grandmasters thought the position was about even. Knight and 2 pawns is material value for the rook. The trouble is that was the sealed move, bringing the king back. Neither side can really organize an attack without moving the pieces away from his own king, which would let the other side in. You have to keep your pieces close to the king for defense. Neither side can really attempt anything, so they agree to draw.
Nathan, a happy if baffled crowd.
Oh, yes. They enjoyed the game tremendously. But it was a disappointment, artistically speaking, that Karpov didn't win the game.
Right, well, Bill, Jan Timman last week showed us the win that Karpov himself said he thought he'd missed. Show it us again very quickly.
Yeah, this is the position we have here, and this was the position in which white captured that bishop, just after black's moved his rook up.
Yes.
Now, the amazing winning move is just the king retreat. It's quite natural once you've seen it, because the idea is to bring the queen over in front of the rook to join in the attack. It's what white's been trying to do for so long. Now black continues by taking the knight. So black wins 2 pieces for a rook here. And if white takes the bishop now, you get much the same position as in the game. But the key move is to bring the queen over first. Now white's threatening mate. Black's king has to run away. White gives a check. All the time, white not taking the bishop. King must move. Now is the time to take the bishop, because white's queen now defends the important pawn. Now, now white has active queen and rook. It's so different from the position in the game. We can give one sample variation of how things might go. Black could push a pawn. White gives a queen check. White actually has the initiative, which he never managed to get back in the real game. Now rook check. This is forcing black onto the defensive. Knight must come back. White's still attacking. Black's just not going to be given a chance to develop counterplay. Black must stop that pawn before it gets too far. And eventually, after all this, white's king is just going to come along and eventually eat up this pawn. And white will get a winning endgame out of all this. But that was a clear win that Karpov missed.
That would have been a comfortable, satisfying, artistic conclusion to a rather exciting game.
Quite a game, that, Bill. Interesting that a couple of days later, Karpov then lost. Do you think that he had a lot taken out of him in that game?
Yes, I think so. I think one of the problems in a match like this is knowing how fit you are to play each day, knowing when to take the time-outs. And I think perhaps after that game, it was an emotional failure by Karpov, that game. He built up a strategically winning position. That's the difficult thing to do in chess, building up the winning positions. Finishing them off shouldn't be a problem, but he just, in his opponent's time trouble, he just lost emotional control.
And then, of course, in game 8, he lost it on time with 10 moves to play. Quite incredible.
Yes, and was complaining of this mental paralysis at the end of the game, just unable to think.
Nathan, in your view, do you think these games are getting more and more complicated between these two?
No, I think they each have this bag full of opening tricks and theory, and they're saving them for critical moments. But it's interesting to me that we each have our prejudices. I seem to be prejudiced in favor of Karpov because, although he's very far, he's closer to my age. But I'm aware of this. And you, Bill, seem to be prejudiced in favor of Kasparov. The difference is that you're not aware of it.
I thought I was prejudiced in favor of Karpov.
That's an even more horrible interpretation.
Well, what have I said to praise Kasparov throughout this series?
Well, we can go through the record at our leisure.
It's rather interesting, actually. It's interesting because Bill, in fact, has always been very pro-Karpov. He's a great admirer, particularly of Karpov's endgame technique, where Karpov with a couple of pawns and a knight can be something magical.
Yes, that's very true, but that was before the advent of Kasparov.
Yeah, the thing that really impresses me about Kasparov is his appetite for chess. And Karpov can't play for a win every game in a 24-game match. He seems to have to hype himself up for the big occasion. I mean, the quick draw in game 9, I think he decided at move 1 that he wasn't going to play flat out a hard, complex strategic game. In game 10 and 8, he did play these hard games. He had to.
Very quickly, one word from each of you. Do you think that in some way or another they're both saving themselves up for Leningrad in the second half?
Yes.
Not at all.
You don't?
No way.
You think next week more thud and blunder?
This is life and death right here and now.
Nathan, thank you very much. Bill, thank you very much. The games will be on CFAX next week, page 268. We should be back next week, slightly earlier, in fact, at 6:20. So until then, from all of us here, a very good evening to you.